Happy Tuesday. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 144, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, widely known as the Mighty Yogo, also widely known as truly the only committee that matters. Just a reminder, everyone, to please keep your headphones away from your microphones at all times. Reminder, ladies, this committee has passed a motion that any requested documents, emails, etc., are to be returned to the committee within 21 days. Colleagues, we'll do, it'll be 3 rounds, then we will take a break for the next witness, and then I just have a couple really quick at the very end housekeeping items around budget and setting a date for witnesses. So we welcome back Ms. Boudreau from Comptroller General's office. Do you have an opening statement for us? The floor is yours for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Bonjour, je vous remercie, Monsieur.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity to speak with the committee on the subject of federal grants and contributions process. With me today are Monia Alaye, Assistant Controller General for Financial Management Sector, and Nicole Thomas, Executive Director of Costs, Charging and Transfer Payments. As Controller General, I'm responsible for providing functional direction and assurance on financial management, internal audit, investment planning, procurement, project management, and the management of real property, material, and transfer payments across the federal government. Federal grants and contributions are governed by the Treasury Board policy on transfer payments, which sets out the roles, responsibilities, and accountability for the management of transfer payments. The objective is to ensure that transfer payment programs meet government priorities, deliver results for Canadians, and are managed with integrity, transparency, and accountability. Control mechanisms are in place throughout the process, starting with the requirement for departments to obtain approval in principle for government programs by tabling a memorandum to Cabinet.
Departments must then seek approval of the Treasury Board for new program terms and conditions through the Treasury Board submission process. The terms and conditions set out the parameters under which transfer payments may be made for a given program, including objectives, funding, results, eligibility criteria, such as eligible recipients, activities or initiatives, and also expenditures. The role of the Treasury Board Secretariat is to ensure that the terms and conditions align to Cabinet direction and the policy and directive on transfer payments, as well as other applicable policies or frameworks, policy on result, gender-based analysis plus, official languages. The Secretariat provides feedback to departments during the review process to ensure compliance with Treasury Board policy. Once the Treasury Board approves the submission, deputy heads play a key role in the delivery and management of transfer payments. They are responsible for ensuring that grant and contribution programs are accessible, usable, and understandable for applicants and recipients. Deputy heads ensure that departmental practices and procedures are in place and look for opportunities to standardize within the department to support the administration of grants and contributions, ensuring the requirements are proportionate to the risks involved. Deputy heads are responsible for monitoring compliance with the policy and its supporting directives, including through periodic audits and other assessments to ensure their effective implementation. This includes ensuring that the administrative requirements on recipients are proportionate to the risk level. Monitoring, reporting, and auditing should reflect the risk specific to the program, the value of funding, and the risk profile of the recipient. Departmental audits and evaluations help identify best practices, areas for improvement, and whether the program is achieving its intended outcomes. The results are used to inform future program design and policy adjustments. Once the recipients of transfer payment programs enter into a funding agreement with the federal government, this agreement outlines the requirement for the funding, including reporting requirements, payment schedules, and performance expectations. This allows the government to monitor the use of funds and ensure that the program is on track to achieve its objectives. Pour améliorer la transparence,
To enhance transparency, government departments are required by law and policy to proactively publish the grants and contributions that are over $25,000. This means that information on who received funding, how much they received, and for what purpose they received it is made available to the public, including on the Open Government website. Audit and evaluation reports on grants and contributions programs are posted on departmental websites. This practice helps maintain public confidence and accountability in the management of public funds. In conclusion, my office supports these processes by ensuring that sound policies and practices are in place, by overseeing and monitoring compliance with the Treasury Board policy and on transfer payments, and by providing leadership for the development of the community of federal practitioners involved in the design, delivery, and management of transfer payment programs. Mr. Chair, I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Mrs. Kusi for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Out of the hundreds of millions spent in the Environment Department's grants and contributions program, how much has Treasury Board approved, please?
so every time that there is a new program, the department must come to Treasury Board for review and approval. So every time it's a new program, terms and conditions, they have to come. So I would say it would depend which calendar fiscal year you're referring to. But again, that's the principle, and that's the process that we are applying every time, not only for ECCC, but for all organizations across the Government of Canada.
Okay, so Treasury Board would have approved the funds for this program on a fiscal year-by-year basis. Is that correct?
It depends. If it is funding for ongoing program, it will have been approved once at Treasury Board. But after that, as you know, because this committee is quite involved with the estimates, every time they will have to come and present their new funding via an estimate.
Has your department ever reviewed the program to ensure that funds were going to recipients that had clear plans to improve environmental protections?
So this responsibility, as I stated in my opening remarks, belong to the DPLI heads. So the DPLI heads will have the opportunity to request internal audit to look into that, and that's exactly what ECCC requested the DPLI minister, because he had some concerns. So he wanted to have a third-party review or a independent assessment from his internal audit function.
The report states that the top ADM committee evaluates proposals deemed to be medium to high risk that exceed $100,000. However, 94% of the reviewed files in this audit did not have the right documentation to support the risk rating. Are you concerned at all about departments not doing their due diligence to ensure that funds are spent appropriately?
I am always concerned by the lack of documentation. So that's why under my group, we have what we call a center of expertise that Nicole leads. And we always remind departments that every time that there is a money going out the door, as per the Financial Administration Act, Section 32, 33, and 34, that the due diligence should be done at all levels.
Since 2016, there have been 3,103 grants and contributions awarded over $100,000. How many of these have been reviewed by the Treasury Board?
Is your question specific to ECCC?
Yes, because it would be the 3,103 grants and contributions awarded over 100K within the program.
So we do not review those programs. Like I was saying, deputy heads are responsible for their own programs, and if they feel that there is a concern or they want to make sure that everything is effective, they will be asking their internal audit function to look into this according to the risk of the grant or of the contribution or the program itself.
The problems in the ECCC grants and contributions have been ongoing since 2016 when the minister moved from small to large-scale program delivery. The decentralized structure and limited resources were strained, which has led to potential legal and reputational damage. Has the Treasury Board done any follow-up to ensure the funds provided to this program were allocated correctly?
We have not done any specific audit regarding what you just mentioned. Again, it will be at the deputy minister level to look at those instances.
Are you concerned about the lack of accountability and oversight in this program?
So we are all concerned. So that's why an audit was requested by the deputy minister to look into that. And as well, maybe I should have mentioned my role in terms of the risk-based audit plan that all departments put together every year. Those audit plans are shared with my office for review and to make sure that we are comfortable with the risk identified and also the way forward in terms of auditing and evaluating.
Do you believe that the Environment Department has ever wasted taxpayers' money?
That's not a question that I can answer.
Okay. Do you believe the Environment Department always delivered value for money to taxpayers?
So the policy on transfer payment is clear in terms of value for money. And like I said, I will expect all deputy ministers to play their role in terms of ensuring that they are following the policy as well as the directive and also the guideline.
In your opinion, do you believe all departments should be auditing all grants and contributions?
It would depend. It would depend which organization. It would depend the value of grants and contributions. It will depend also about other risks that departments may have. And obviously, we cannot audit everything. So again, it will be a question of considering all the potential risk, the risk mitigation strategies that departments have into place, and what's left that we feel that should be looked at.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mrs. Kusi. Mr. Jawari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and once again, welcome to the TBS and Madame Boudoir. You and your colleagues for coming here. Thank you for your opening remarks and testimony. I'm going to take a little bit of a step back and frame. I'll be framing my question around two themes. One is around transfer payments, and the other one is around internal audit. Starting with transfer payments, I understand there is policies around transfer payments, and there are directives around transfer payments. So for average Canadians like me, can you explain the difference between policies around transfer payments and directive around transfer payments? Who are they targeted? Who are responsible for and why there was a need between having a policy and a directive?
Nicole?
Yes. Thank you for that. So the policy is really focused on the roles and responsibilities of the various players within that space and outlines, again, in the context of transfer payments, what are their roles and responsibilities in the design and implementation of transfer payments. And then in the case of transfer payments, that is the role of the Treasury Board Secretariat, ministers, deputy heads. Then when we move into the directive on transfer payments, that then provides additional information on how to operationalize your transfer payment programs and the considerations in that regard. And so that's for really departmental senior managers who are involved in the delivery of transfer payment programs and the design as well, to talk about what are the requirements for program terms and conditions, and also what are the requirements for funding agreements. And so while we don't specify what goes into the funding agreements, we do give considerations for departments as to what we would expect them to include in those agreements.
Thank you. So if I understood what you said is the policy focuses on the how and the directive focuses on what and the different levels of responsibility, minister and, head of the, the deputy minister and head. And the other one is for the what is really at the, directors and below, correct?
Yes, the
Okay.
directive
Is
provides
there a
more granularity.
threshold? I mean, when I look at the 2022-23 fiscal grants and contribution breakdown by in that department, there were about 9 items, and they were varied from $1.3 million to $318 million. $1.3 million for public affairs and communication branch, and $318 million for Canada Wildlife Services, as well as about $96 million for Indigenous recipients. So when we see this range, is there a threshold that TBS sets as a level? Because in your response, Madam Boudoir, you were saying, well, it depends. It depends on the amount. It depends on the risk. And I'm trying to get a better understanding of what that depends mean.
So my answer about it depends on the risk was related to the internal audit function.
Okay.
If we go back to the transfer payments, if there is a new set of terms and conditions, a new program, that has to come to Treasury Board, regardless of the amount involved. That has to come to authorize. Once it is authorized, there are limits that have been that are imposed. Those limits for each department, it's included in what we call the matrix of delegation of authorities. And those delegation of authorities are accessible on the department's website, and you can see what are the level for each of the programs, terms, and conditions.
So following the same process, standard process, regardless whether the grant is $100,000 or the grant is $10 million, the process is the same. It's just the level of authorization varies. For example, in the case of public affairs and communication branch, about the allocated amount was $1.3 million. Who would be making decisions? Would it be at the director level who will making decisions on, approval of these grants and contributions? Who would be making that decision?
You're talking about the approval of the amount, or once it is allocated to recipients?
Well, it is the amount that's allocated to the program is $1.3 million. That's the way I understand. So that's already agreed between TBS and the structure of the program. But the projects that fall under the $1.3 million or fall under the public affairs and communication branch, is there an amount that will necessitates, let's say, the minister gets involved, or is an amount that says below this threshold, the directors can approve the grant?
I would say that it is specific program by program and department by department. So for this specific question, we will need to go back and come back to the committee within 21 days.
Okay. I only got about probably 20 seconds on policies and internal audit. Have you looked at the report and made any conclusion around whether the internal audit followed all the procedures? A simple yes and no with 3 seconds will do.
Yes, I'm convinced that all the procedures were followed in terms of the policy of internal audit.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question will be for Ms. Thomas. Ms. Thomas, in the internal audit publication at ECCC last June, there were serious shortcomings in the grants and contributions program. That's what was mentioned there. And even for larger amounts that required the minister's approval. I'd like to draw your attention to the approval process for these projects as part of the Net Zero Accelerator Fund for the Innovative Strategies Fund. On page 8 of the Commissioner's fourth report, at ECCC, we can see that anything over $50 million must be approved by the minister, and also other departments involved must have their say, and it must all be approved. Now, this approval process, can be sped up through a letter sent to the Prime Minister. Now, this kind of wording means that a number of interpretations could be made. Ms. Thomas, in a context where we've seen that various SDTC programs have been administered in a way that could be considered creative, how is it possible to ensure that decisions, even when the ministers or Prime Minister are involved, how can we ensure that decisions are made in an impartial way without any appearance of collusion, favoritism, any kind of political interference, anything like that? How can we be sure that it's completely neutral, the approval process, for these grants and contributions for anything over $50 million? Well, I can start by saying that the process that the Controller General described is as follows. When the programs are approved by Treasury Board, with the modalities in place for those programs, we will get information whether it's a grant or contribution, telling us who can access the funds and for what purposes, what the objectives are with those programs. After that, it's managed within the departments with the deputy ministers. They manage their process for providing agreements and projects to recipients. Part of that control mechanism is to have all the internal controls in place that will ensure that their business processes have the required approvals and other processes in place to make sure that processes are standardized and that everybody goes through the same process. So what you just said, that goes also for projects over $50 million. And sorry for the Anglicism here. And when there was been a fast track with the minister, if all those processes state that no, this isn't the way necessarily to make sure that this is the right place to put the money, and then the minister said, no, the $52 million, we're going to put it there in that project. Is it the minister who has the last say, or is it all the rest of the process that was done beforehand by deputy ministers and others? I don't know if you want to add anything, but I would say that within the departments, whatever way the approval is provided, it's always at the same level of review, diligence, and so on that must be met within the departments for these recommendations. Can the minister go against the recommendations, their department's recommendations? Well, it's a question that's difficult to answer. I've never been in a situation where I issued a recommendation and the minister was against it. Can I say that it will never happen? I mean, that's not something I can answer. Thank you very much. Earlier, Ms. Boudreau, you stated that each department is responsible for their own audits. That's what you said last time also when you appeared. But is there anything in place to make sure that the audits are done, that they're done properly, and that there's a follow-up to ensure that if the department did not properly do their audits, that things can be fixed quickly so that these errors are not repeated? We are in charge of or rather we help the internal audit process. We provide help training tools to make sure they have all the tools in place to properly implement the audit process. There are IIA standards, international auditing standards. Each internal audit must be reviewed every 5 years by an external administrator to ensure that they're being conducted properly and that they're planned in a way that they provide the best service and meet the standards. So what happens if the audits are not done properly or the tools aren't done properly and there are the same errors year after year? I mean, what happens?
Time, but next round. Mr. Backrack, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being with us this morning. It's a little bit tricky to know which questions are appropriate for the Treasury Board versus ECCC, but I'll do my best. And perhaps my first question is whether you were surprised when you read the audit findings. Are these findings surprising?
I'm not sure if I use the word surprising or disappointing. I will use the word disappointing. Lack of documentation for me. I was an internal auditor for several years before being at Treasury Board, and I don't understand why people will not be documenting their decisions and documenting to have an audit trail at the end of the day. For me, is just being professional and following values and ethics. So yes, I was disappointed.
So maybe my next question will be along those lines. The lack of documentation is something that we've seen in a number of different audits. It seems to be and I asked a question of a previous witness, and I think it was the Auditor General, and they indicated that it's a very frequent audit finding that documentation is not at par. If this is something that we're seeing across government departments, every time an audit is done, they show that that people within the public service aren't documenting things properly. Does it not deserve some attention itself as a priority of government to improve documentation so that we don't see audits coming again and again that show that people aren't writing things down?
Yes, it does. And that's why last year we have updated for procurement our guide to make sure that managers will be following a minimum of a requirement and that documentation is obviously one of the elements. So I would like to go back, like you said, it's difficult sometimes to make the distinction between this audit and others. In this particular case, as it was stated, the program is decentralized at ECCC. So being decentralized means that you will find different processes across the regions, and that's one of the findings that the Deputy Minister said that we'll be looking at. So by doing more standard processes, I would hope that at the end of the day, the documentation will be better.
Some witness testimony in a previous meeting indicated that the lack of documentation was stemming from a lack of, and this was around procurement, was stemming from a lack of understanding of the actual rules, that the rules and the processes were so complex that public servants didn't understand what the requirements were in the first place. Is that your understanding of the problem as well?
It is part of it, and that's why we're working very closely with the Canada School of Public Service to put training together for every level of people involved in the procurement, as an example, the business owner, the practitioner. So yes, it is an issue, and sometimes it's always good to have a refresher of what we're supposed to do.
Now, on the topic of centralization, because one of the recommendations is really around centralizing and standardizing approaches across the department, and I think even more broadly than that across government, it seems that there would also be some drawbacks to centralization. What would those drawbacks, like? It's a balance between the advantages of standardization and centralization and the ability of departments to have flexibility based on the unique conditions that they face. Yeah. How do you strike the right balance in that regard?
That's a very good question. The drawback that I see right away is if it's too centralized, maybe we have a little bit less flexibilities for recipients, and that could be an issue, and also less time to put money out the door for people that need the money.
One of the findings had to do specifically with Indigenous recipients of grants and contributions. And the internal audit found that Indigenous recipients were more likely to be assigned a higher risk rating, and that those higher risk ratings came with increased responsibilities around things like documentation and other processes for accountability. Is the Treasury Board alive to the issues that creates for Indigenous communities that often have limited capacity? How do we ensure that they are put in a position to effectively manage these grants and contributions, given what are often challenges around capacity?
So that's a good question. When the Deputy Minister was here for ECCC, he talked about additional flexibility that Treasury Board Secretariat put together for Indigenous. And in fact, it is the Annex K outlining flexibility for Indigenous recipients. Maybe I'll turn over to Nicole if you want to provide the 3 elements that we have added.
Yes,
About
certainly.
40 seconds.
Oh, how many seconds?
40.
40.
Right. So we've given additional instruments and methods of making those funding agreements. So there's fixed funding, flexible funding, and block funding that are exclusively or specifically outlined for Indigenous recipients and their context to allow them to manage within their specific circumstances.
Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. We will now go to our 5-minute rounds. Mrs. Kusi.
Would you say that the Treasury Board President has been able to give this audit her full attention?
So I am responsible for the internal audit function within the Government of Canada.
But the Treasury Board President herself, would you say she's been available and present to give this audit her full attention?
So usually those internal audits will be the responsibility of the Deputy Minister.
But certainly the Deputy Minister interacts with the President of the Treasury Board regarding these important issues, such as the spending of taxpayer dollars. Would you say that the Treasury Board President has been less available? Less access? Have you had less access to her lately?
No, I would not say she was less available for that kind of challenges or that kind of reports. I am responsible again for the internal audit function. This is up to me.
Well, it's the Treasury Board President who is ultimately responsible. And as I'm sure you're aware, she's taken on another ministry. And so it's just very concerning to me that she's being spread too thin. She's not able to give this audit her full attention, the oversight of taxpayer dollars, her full attention. We kind of have a part-time president of the Treasury Board right now, given that she's managing these 2 files. I certainly was shadow minister for transport during the pandemic, and I can tell you that this is a very taxing file when you're overseeing all of the airlines, the train travel, especially now the shortcomings that we've seen with our critical supply chains. And so I'm very concerned that this evidence we are receiving through this report indicates that we have a minister, a president of the Treasury Board, who is not able to give her entire attention to the oversight of taxpayer dollars. What would you say to that, please?
I am not concerned. I meet with the president every week because, as you mentioned, she's the president of the Treasury Board. They meet every Thursday morning, and before every meeting, we have a briefing with her, and we have her full attention, and we have great discussions about the files that will be presented on a Thursday morning.
But it would be impossible to have her full attention because she's giving half of her attention currently to the transport file. Now, I know in 2019, you issued, the Treasury Board issued the further guidelines, and yet we're still getting these lapses we're seeing here through the ECCC audit. A couple of months ago, we received feedback that Global Affairs Canada, through their audit, was also having some problem with the oversight of the distribution of funds. And so I really have to take it again back to the president of the Treasury Board. And so I'm just asking if you believe she's giving her full attention to the oversight of these grants and contributions, if she's been as accessible to you. And I just believe that would be very difficult for her to achieve this, her to do this, given that, frankly, how thin she's being spread over departments. And as I said, we really seem to have a part-time president right now, given this additional duties that she's been given. So given that we have these lapses through ECC, Global Affairs Canada, despite your issuing of the guidelines in 2019, I'll ask you one more time. Do you really believe that Canadians are getting value for money, that taxpayers are getting value for money?
From a perspective, I have access to the president when I need to, and she is extremely accessible for all the files that I am in charge of.
Right. Again, it's unfortunate because the results that we are seeing through, thank goodness, these audits are indicating that the oversight simply is not there at this time. As I mentioned, she was the president of the Treasury Board, now taken on the Ministry of Transport, which is a very intense file. And then, of course, given the difficult situation of the Prime Minister and the Liberal Party at this time, I'm concerned her efforts are even further diluted by the possibility of her posing a leadership campaign as well. So, I mean, this is really a president of a Treasury Board who is supposed to have oversight of all the funds of our nation, whose energy is divided, not one way. Running one department, I imagine, would be completely consuming, but is also responsible for the Department of Transport at the same time as possibly posing a leadership bid. It's quite concerning, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sousa, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. I'm just listening to the line of questioning that just happened to in regards to the President of the Treasury Board, an individual of great caliber, lawyer, professor, a strong advocate for consumer rights, someone that was quite active in the Securities Commission, someone that I worked with prior when I was in the role of finance minister as well as president of the Treasury Board at the time, relying on the exceptional abilities of this individual who was extremely accessible and very engaged and active in the issues. She's quite the champion in the role that she plays in Treasury Board, and we really do rely on some of that oversight that she provides. But in question about this particular issue, these internal audits, I mean, they're standard. This is something that's prescribed. This is something that's mandated to be done, regardless of who the ministers may be at any given time. She herself was a previous Minister of Procurement and Operations for Government, and she did an exceptional job during COVID in regards to some of the negotiations that we had. And I've always found her to be extremely attentive, if not even more meticulous in trying to push forward on the matters at hand, because she does review things tremendously. When I see and talk to her, she's well informed. Can you, given that this is a mandate that's required for review, is it not prudent then to do them and to provide recommendations to improve upon the issues? I mean, this is not a static issue. This is an ongoing relationship that's required in order to improve the operations of government. Is that not true?
So thank you for the question. Indeed, so I always welcome internal audit reports. There is always a lot to be learned and also a lot to share with other departments. So other departments will have seen the report from ECCC, and I'm sure they're going to look at that and compare it within their own organization if they need to do improvement. So it's more, in fact, than only ECCC. It is across the board. And again, to come back to audits, the minister herself announced in March of this year that Treasury Board, TBS, will be doing a horizontal audit on procurement. So this is my team doing a horizontal audit on procurement, again, to look at processes that we have in place, the governance that we have, internal controls, and we'll be able to communicate the result of that audit in the new calendar year.
Right, and then of course there's the policy directives. That's a responsibility of the deputies and the senior officials. And I think I heard you correctly. Then there's directives, right, by which it obliges those managers and functional specialists to do the action. So there's a division here, and there's a protection. There's a buffer, right? So allegations or the notions of somehow there's interference or preferences made by certain individuals of government, be them ministers or deputy ministers. Are you satisfied that there is no interference? Like, are you satisfied with the way the process is being done to protect taxpayers from any issues of collusion, let's call it?
So in the process that I've highlighted in my opening remarks, there are a lot of checks and balances in the process at different levels of the government, inside departments and also from a TBS perspective. So based on all the processes that we do have, I am comfortable with what I'm saying. Lack of documentation, like I said, it is disappointing, but that's something that could be fixed and could be fixed very in a timely manner.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that was most disappointing was the issues of standardization and not having some of that across the board issues, which are being resolved. Hence, the reason we do these internal audits, so that we can have continuous improvement. My last question is: do you see the president or any minister providing interference or obstructions in these processes?
I've never seen any of those things.
Have they been accessible to you? Has the president of the Treasury Board been available to you when necessary?
Yes, she has been available to me.
Any more time?
32 seconds.
Hey, do you have anything to add, Mrs. Lahari? Listen, I appreciate it. I do have another round of questions I'll come back to you with. Thank you.
Do you want to share your time with us?
We will now go over to Mrs.
There's some
Vignola for 2.5
parliamentarians over here who
minutes
are trying
of
to
questions.
do their job.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Boudreau, from what I understood regarding the difference between grants and contributions, for grants, we're going to determine what the criteria are. And in terms of contributions, there is accountability that needs to be provided. My question is the following. When grants and contributions are provided to businesses for developing green technologies, we're hoping for some kind of accountability, some results. The Canadian people, through the government, are becoming investors in green technology. I mean, as with any investment, there can be an objective that is not reached because of the way the development goes, for example, but it can also lead to good results. Are there clauses where there can be a return on investments for Canada, for the country, if the research leads to good results, for example? Is there some kind of a right of investors of 2%, for example? Just throwing out a number. 2%. Is that a clause that exists when money is invested through grants and contributions, or is the money just provided and there's no direct return? I mean, I know there might be jobs created, but directly, is there a direct return on investment? Thank you for the question. I want to come back to the terms grants. There's always eligibility criteria, and Treasury Board Secretariat always confirms them. I just wanted to mention that right off the bat. Now, in terms of your questions, there are always grants and contributions. There will be terms and conditions for every grant or contribution. Do I have a typical example right now? No, not right off the top of my head, but that's why we have conditions in place to make sure that we know what the responsibilities of each party is, or are rather. And I don't know, Nicole, if you wanted to add something at that level. I could just add quickly that one of the things we find in our directive is that contribution agreements through a program include requirements for any funds that have been overpaid or funds that have not been paid or spent rather, or any expenditures that are not in line with the project guidelines and so on. So thank you. I'll go on later.
One of the findings of the audit was that resources at ECCC were strained, and that some of the lack of documentation and some of the other audit findings probably stem from a lack of internal resources to manage the process. It seems like a pretty logical finding that if you increase grants and contributions astronomically in a short period of time and you don't invest resources in the processes to manage that, they're not going to be managed appropriately. Does Treasury Board have guidelines around internal resourcing, given different levels of grants and contributions? Like if you're giving out, $2 billion, should you allocate 5% for internal capacity to actually document and write things down and do those kinds of things?
Every time that there is a new program being brought to Treasury Board for approval, it is accompanied by what we call a CFO attestation. So the CFO will be looking at the new programs that the departments will need to run. And based on the new program and the complexity of that program, the CFO will be requiring additional internal services or an additional full-time equivalent in order to be able to run that program. So before it goes to Treasury Board, several discussions will happen between the department and us to make sure that we have the proper level of additional internal services required and to make sure that effectively that the department will be able to deliver. But coming back to that audit, if I may, the lack also of decentralization, the fact that it is decentralized, I don't think that there is room to gain more efficiency and maybe to be able to run those programs in a more timely manner.
So there's a process in place, and if the process worked as it's supposed to work, then the resources shouldn't be strained because the resources should be augmented appropriately based on this conversation with the CFO. In this case, obviously, it didn't work because one of the audit findings is that the resources were strained. How are we going to ensure that it works in the future?
Again, it will be a discussion, like I said, between the organization and TBS, but also looking at their internal processes, that they make sure that they are effective and efficient. So we always recommend departments to look inside to make sure if there is a way to reallocate money internally, and because we're talking about taxpayers' money.
Okay, is that it?
That's it.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mazur, welcome to OGO. Go ahead for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. An internal audit of grants and contributions programs revealed that the Environment Department was not monitoring 10% of the projects and not reviewing a further 27%. Why weren't these projects being monitored?
That will be based on the risk, I would say, of those programs. We cannot monitor all programs as we cannot audit every element. So I would say that it is a question probably for the department to provide more information about why those specific elements were not entirely looked at. The entire grants and contributions funding.
Well, personally, I find it quite unacceptable that here you have an environment minister not monitoring how many emissions are being reduced with taxpayers' dollars, and you really don't have a reason for it. So it's ultimately up to the minister to send that signal back to you guys to check for that.
So it is up to the deputy minister to make sure that they have the right controls into place and making sure that their programs are effective, and also to make sure that they have fulfilled their obligation in terms of terms and conditions of the contribution funding or the grant.
Can you provide a list of these projects to the committee that were not being reviewed and were not monitored?
We'll follow up with the department and provide that information to the committee.
Thank you. The government launched an $8 billion taxpayer-funded program called the Net Zero Accelerator. The government claimed they could reduce emissions by giving away $8 billion to mega corporations through this program. According to the Environment Commissioner, and I quote, A project of more than $50 million also requires Treasury Board approval, concurrence letters from ministers of other concerned departments, and cabinet approval. The commissioner also state that the net zero accelerator projects, and I quote, can be fast-tracked with a letter to the Prime Minister, end quote. How many net zero accelerator projects were fast-tracked with a letter to the Prime Minister?
That I don't have the information for you. We can go back to the department. But my understanding is the commissioner will be appearing just after us, so that could be a question for him.
So in that list of people, it does go to the Treasury Board, and do you have any recollection of any letters, anything like that would never go past your desk as far as the letter?
No, I don't have any recollection.
Okay, thank you. Are you aware of any other emission reduction projects that can be fast-tracked with a letter to the Prime Minister?
I'm not aware, no.
Treasury Board is required to approve net zero accelerator projects that receive more than $50 million. How many emissions have been reduced to date from the approved projects?
This will, a good reference point will be to go in the departmental plan and departmental result report, where the information will be provided for each of those programs.
But you do an audit on these programs. The whole idea of releasing the funds is to get outcomes. And the Treasury Board is watching over that. And that's what you gave before for testimony. So why don't you know the answer to that?
I'm not responsible for the outcomes for all those departments. Deputy heads that are administering those programs for those departments will be in a better position to provide the answers to your questions.
So the Deputy Minister of Environment would know about the Net Zero Accelerator Fund.
Yeah, this is a program that is part of his department. That's correct.
It's interesting because he said he didn't know anything about it. So I guess we'll have to get him back here in front of committee. Is the Environment Department fully monitoring the results of their grants and contribution spending?
So they're doing audits, like I said, and I would like also to add that as per the Financial Administration Act, every programs need to be greater than $5 million, need to be evaluated every 5 years. So that is a requirement in the law. So every department need to do that.
So they are. I'll ask the question again, just so we're clear. Is the Environment Department fully monitoring the results of their grants and contribution spending? Is it law then?
Like I said, every programs above $5 million, as per the Financial Administration Act, need to be reviewed every 5 years. And all those evaluations will be accessible on the department's website.
Okay,
thank you very much. And we'll finish up with Mr. Baines. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our Treasury Board Secretariat officials for joining us today. I want to talk a little bit about the oversight to the transfer payments. And you mentioned you're looking for efficiencies and effectiveness of how these things are done. And what's the process there? Like how do you measure effectiveness and the efficiencies?
So, like I was just saying, there is a requirement to do evaluations, as well as there is a requirement to do internal audits in each department. Having said that, my group is responsible to do internal audit for what we call small departments. Within the Government of Canada, we have roughly 44 departments for which we are in charge of doing the audit on their behalf, because they don't have the tools and the manpower necessary to do so. As well, we have some agreements with regional development agencies in order as well to do some audits for them. Because, again, they don't have the...
But you said you can't do all of them. So then there's mechanisms in place to measure things that are being processed appropriately? You know, so what are those?
So this is a risk-based approach. So we look at the nature.
So what
of
are the risk indicators?
Yeah, so we look at the risk indicators, we look at the amount of funding, we look at the programs. Is it a new program? Is it a program that has been there for several years? We look at the initiatives into place. We look also at other elements. So we look to make sure that it is a continuous
Can I
monitoring.
stop at the programs that are there for several years? We've seen, processes that have not changed for over 20 years, and we've seen that run into problems. We've studied other, funding pieces within this committee as well, where the fear is if there's programs that have been there for several years, is there less oversight on those? That's my question.
It's not less oversight. So the risk-based audit plan is a 3-year audit plan that needs to be refreshed every year. Those plans comes to my group and we look at them to make sure that at the end of the day we have a good audit coverage on all programs. And again, if there is some challenges or if a deputy minister believes that he would like to have more information about a particular program, the deputy minister, as his role, can decide to ask for a specific audit from his internal audit shop.
Can I maybe direct my question to Ms. Thomas? Considering you're the executive director of costing, charging, transfer payments, can you talk a little bit about your role in all of this and your oversight?
So I can build upon what the Controller General spoke to you about internal controls, about internal audit rather. And one of the things that we do, you'll notice that some of the thematics that come out of those reviews are strengthening processes and strengthening capacity within the department to deliver those programs. And so we play a role with that community of practitioners. We provide guidance, we provide advice, we work with the Canada School of Public Service to provide training so that we can help address some of those issues that come out and proactively target themes. And we also have governance committees with departments where they can raise common concerns and considerations in their implementation.
So you're a little bit more hands-on and more actively involved in these applications, and how many people are part of the overall broad group that's looking at this and doing this work together?
So we're not involved in the applications and the actual implementation of the programs. That's all within departments. What we do is we provide that policy center of expertise support to departments. We have a relatively small team within our organization, and we work across departments and facilitate the sharing of best practices and provide concrete advice when they're doing their design.
That's our time. Thanks as always for being with us. Before you go, I just have a couple quick questions myself, if you don't mind. How many of the departments have chief audit executives? And the reason I ask this is that's who did this one. We've had several other less than stellar audits. One from Global Affairs on their horrific non-practice of following rules on procurement. This one. How many other departments have the chief audit executives, and what direction are they taking to actually do these audits to uncover similar messes that we have here and with Global Affairs and elsewhere?
I will provide you with the specific number right after the meeting.
Right, and who's giving the direction though to the chief to the auditor? Is it the deputy minister in each department?
So deputy minister give directions. Each big organization will have also what we call a DAC, Departmental Audit Committee, and those will be external representative that would also give feedback and also recommendation. And like I was saying, we also review all the risk-based audit
But
plan.
what I'm getting at, we've seen these two audits done, I assume directed by the department itself. How many more should be getting done, considering, the millions and millions of grants being done? Heritage Canada, 50,000 grants a year. Who is directing these audits to be performed?
So myself can also direct audits to be performed.
Okay, are you then?
Excuse me?
Are you then? And should you be directing every single department to be doing these audits? Because every audit that seems to be done seems to be a very disturbing lack of oversight, governance, rule following.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and last year my predecessor recommended to each chief audit executive to put in their plan a procurement audit. So yes, we do. We do every time that we feel or there is a need to do something specific. I can give the instruction to departments to put in their risk audit plan something specific. So it was done last year with my predecessor for procurement.
Well, thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
And we'll suspend for 5 minutes to bring in the new witness. Thank you very much. We are back. We welcome Mr. DeMarco, Mr. Bluen, welcome to OGO. You have an opening statement, sir. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for inviting me to appear before your committee today. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I am accompanied today by Nicolas Bleuin, a director in our office. I understand that the committee has recently heard from Environment and Climate Change Canada officials on the grants and contributions process at that department. While I'm happy to answer questions and provide any insights that I can in support of the committee's work, I want to be clear that the grants and contribution programs of Environment and Climate Change Canada have not been the focus of any recent audits. As this is my first appearance before this committee, I would like to take this opportunity to provide an overview of the Commissioner's role and mandate. On behalf of the Auditor General of Canada, the Commissioner conducts performance audits of matters that relate to the environment and sustainable development, and reports to Parliament typically twice a year. These reports are referred to the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development, but are often studied by a wide range of committees in the House of Commons and the Senate. Like the Auditor General, the Commissioner does not audit the policy decisions of Parliament and government. Our work examines whether government departments and agencies implement policy decisions with due regard to economy, efficiency, effectiveness, and the environment. I would like to note that the environment and sustainable development are a priority across the Office of the Auditor General of Canada. Les audits réalisés par la vérificatrice.
The audits carried out by the Auditor General and the Commissioner integrate environmental and sustainable development considerations as appropriate. This includes considering the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals when selecting, designing, and carrying out all our performance audits.
Commissaire.
The Commissioner also reviews and comments on the federal government's draft Sustainable Development Strategy. Once the strategy is implemented, we monitor and report on how well federal departments and agencies contribute to meeting the targets of the federal strategy. We also assess and report on their progress in achieving the objectives of their own departmental strategies. We also review the fairness of the information presented in the federal government's progress reports on the implementation of the overall federal strategy. The Commissioner also manages and reports on the environmental petitions process on behalf of the Auditor General. This process allows Canadians to directly question federal ministers about environmental and sustainable development issues within federal jurisdiction and ensures petitioners receive a response from the relevant ministers. In addition, the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act requires the Commissioner to examine, report on, and make recommendations about the Government of Canada's implementation of measures to mitigate climate change, including those intended to meet the latest greenhouse gas emissions targets. Our first report was tabled in 2023, a year earlier than was required, and the second one will be presented for tabling in November. Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to answer questions the committee may have on my recent work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeMarco. We'll start with Mr. Mazier for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioners. Nice to see you again. Commissioner, an internal audit of grants and contribution programs revealed that the Minister Guilbeault's department was not monitoring 10% of the projects and not reviewing a further 27%. In fact, Minister Guilbeault's management of taxpayer dollars was so bad that according to the report, it represented, and I quote, potential legal and reputational damage, end quote. Throughout all your audits, have you ever noticed similar findings where the current government has failed to monitor taxpayer-funded programs?
So, as I mentioned in my opening statement, we haven't had a deep dive into any of Environment and Climate Change Canada's grant and contribution programs the last couple of years, but we have looked at several other departments' programs. One example from last year would be the Net Zero Accelerator Fund from ISED, and we did have concerns regarding that fund. In 2022 or 2021, we had the Emissions Reduction Fund from NRCan, and we had concerns there as well. These are some of the examples of large grant and contribution programs that we have audited and found concerns with.
Do you recall how many dollars that involved?
How many dollars? Well, the Net Zero Accelerator Fund was $8 billion. Emissions Reduction Fund, the onshore program, which we audited, was between 600 and 700 million.
A lot of money, a lot of taxpayers' dollars that are not accounted for, that's for sure. Commissioner, have you ever conducted an audit that revealed the current government was not publicly measuring the value for money of taxpayer-funded programs?
Yes, so value for money is an important aspect of our work. In fact, sometimes one calls a performance audit a value for money audit. So that surfaced quite clearly in our most recent report from 2024, the Strategic Innovation Fund's Net Zero Accelerator Initiative. We have concerns about the failure to properly track and track value for money. We touch on it in other reports as well, and it's something that we're also looking at in our next audit regarding the Net Zero Act, as opposed to the Net Zero Accelerator. So it is something that we're quite concerned about. We have some calculations in here about value for money in the Net Zero Accelerator initiative, and I could get into that in more detail if you wish.
Sure. Okay, well, I'm wrestling here with the mic. Commissioner, have you ever found any evidence to suggest the current government is inflating or inaccurately reporting the emissions they claim to be reducing?
That have been reduced to date, or the claims regarding future emission reduction?
Claims.
So we have a range of audits where we find that the expected reductions have been overestimated or are the subject of overly optimistic assumptions. So if you call those claims or projections, then we do have examples of that in a wide variety of reports. It's actually disappointing. That's something that's come up in reports for many years, and we've had to say somewhat the same thing in different reports over the years in terms of overly optimistic assumptions. Probably the two that come to mind most recently would be the hydrogen audit as well as the Emissions Reduction Fund. In both of those cases, we found that the expected reductions were overly optimistic. And then in our first Net Zero Act report from last year, we also reported on some examples, for example, in the area of public transit.
What's the implications of this? Like if the government, you're reporting this, you're telling them, look, you're double counting, you're inflating the numbers, you're not basically telling the truth to Canadians and how these programs are functioning. So what is the implications of that? What's the results? What happens?
Well, as indicated in our 2021 report on lessons learned in climate change, the failure to execute plans because of double counting, as you mentioned, overly optimistic assumptions, policy decisions that may undermine initiatives, a whole range of things. The net effect of that has been a series of failures to meet targets over the last 3 decades. So it's not just an academic question about, oh, this program isn't meeting its objective or it set out an overly optimistic objective. All of that has added up over the years to a net failure to meet any of these targets to mitigate climate change through emission reductions.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Kuzmierczuk, welcome back. Glad you're feeling better.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. DeMarco, you've been described as a leading Canadian expert in the field of environmental and policy and law. 30 years experience, close to it, in those fields. You also have a bachelor degree from the University of Windsor, is that correct?
That's an easy question, yes.
Yes, that is the source of your superpower, sir. So I'm glad to hear you say that. I wanted to ask you. You did a report on ICED's Net Zero Accelerator, and you found that it took applicants 407 hours to complete an application. Oftentimes, it took 20 months. From the time they applied to the time that they signed a contribution agreement. And I wanted to ask you, in your view, what are the consequences of such a long process?
So this is set out in our report starting at paragraph 21. The long and difficult application review process is the heading. The consequences in this instance of the cumbersome process and lengthy process, one of them has been the failure to attract large emitters. So not many of the emitters that are classified as large emitters in Canada in terms of number of megatons per year of emissions, not many of them were attracted to the fund. Whether that was entirely due to the cumbersome process, I can't say that exactly, but that is one of the potential concerns, is that if the application process is not user-friendly and the fund has an objective of significant reductions in emissions, if you're not attracting the large emitters, then you're not going to get those large reductions.
So it serves as a barrier to some of the applications.
Yes, it's probably a perceived barrier. I mean, anyone can go through it if they really have the will, but it might be a disincentive to those who would want to put their time elsewhere.
Back in 2006, the previous administration called a Blue Ribbon panel on grants and contributions. And one of its recommendations of that panel is to, quote, dramatically simplify the reporting and accountability regime. Can you help us understand how do we square wanting to reduce red tape on the application and reporting side to simplify that process, but at the same time strengthen accountability measures? What's the sweet spot, and how are the two related?
Yeah, you're right in characterizing the potential competing objectives of timeliness and efficiency on the one side and thoroughness and due diligence on the other. But I'm the view that that those objectives aren't mutually exclusive and they don't necessarily run counter to one another. One can have an efficient and effective process that doesn't necessarily equate with years of review, so long as the criteria that are being used are transparent and defensible and in line with best practices. So I would not say that a more effective and efficient review process, which is what we recommend in recommendation 29, is equated with necessarily or correlated completely with time. One can be strategic about how we go through the review and ensure that it is covering all the bases from a due diligence point of view, but isn't cumbersome and lengthy for other reasons that are not contributing to the effectiveness of the review process.
Oh, I appreciate that, and sometimes simplifying the process might make it easier to actually, for auditors and officials to actually make sure that the process is accountable if it's simplified, as opposed to being convoluted. We heard something similar in the conversation when the Comptroller General was here, and she made a remark that documentation is so rudimentary, it's so basic, and yet we've heard time and again from the Auditor General's office and other reporters a pattern of lack of documentation. Do we have a documentation problem, and can you explain why that might be the case? Why we're seeing over and over again documentation that's simply not up to snuff?
So the process and documentation are an important part of any review of the effectiveness of a program, such as this, a grant and contribution program. I would say that the emphasis of this report, though, from our office is more on outcomes than on process. So we we found that the main gaps in this case were value for money, as we've discussed earlier today, as well as the total amount, in this case, of reductions expected from this large sum of money being expended. So in this particular instance, I would say that the main problems we uncovered related to value for money and the lack of a horizontal industrial strategy to guide the use of the money. We didn't find, other than the efficiency and cumbersome, the efficiency of the current cumbersome process, we didn't find a lot of other issues with respect to documentation in this particular audit.
This audit that was done, it was an internal audit of ECCC. I just wanted to ask you whether you feel that that is the right mechanism or venue to review internal processes at ECCC, or would your office be the one best positioned to do an audit? Are you satisfied with the work that was done internally by ECCC? Are they the right mechanism in this instance?
Okay, so just to clarify, when I said this audit, I was talking about the Net Zero Accelerator report from our office.
Pardon me, I wanted to shift back to...
Yeah, so you're shifting back to the internal audit
right.
carried out by ECCC. And I understand you had the Deputy Minister speak to that last week.
Yes.
I haven't had a chance to review the transcript of that hearing yet. I'm not sure if it's been posted on the committee's website yet. I'm not intimately familiar with all of the findings of that internal audit by ECCC regarding their grants and contributions. But in the ecosystem of auditing, both internal audit, such as that example, and parliamentary officers such as an Auditor General's office, including the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development, they both have a role to play. I would have to look carefully at the scope of their audit to determine whether it's something that was covered well or not. But it's not. I haven't audited their audit, if that's your question.
Gotcha. and whether there's value added. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 6.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. DeMarco, Mr. Blouin. Thank you for being here. Mr. DeMarco, quickly, in your remarks, you were saying that the grants and contributions programs at ECCC were not audited recently. Why would that be? Is there a queue? Is it going to be their turn soon? I mean, is there any kind of explanation? Well, there are many contributions and grants programs within the various departments. We were looking at the ones that were aimed at large reductions in greenhouse gas emissions at various departments. It's not that we set aside or ignored the ECCC department. We have a number of audits on the department, but it was more their other programs, not necessarily their grants and contributions programs. Thank you very much. During your remarks, you also stated that you reviewed the preliminary version of the Sustainable Development Plan and so on, and that you had recommendations. Are those suggestions that are applied, that are used? Our latest comments in terms of the new strategy, well, in terms of that, I would say that some of our recommendations were put in place and others were not. So they weren't completely implemented, but they weren't all ignored either. It was between the two. The problem that we have now with the strategy, which persists even following our recommendations, is that the strategy is still more aimed at the environment and not the two other aspects of sustainable development and both economic and social perspectives. So I'd like to see a sustainable development strategy that would integrate all three aspects of sustainable development in a more fair way rather than focusing just on the environment and setting aside the rest of the economic and social sides. Thank you. Your answer leads me to my next question. When you plan something, in my opinion, that means looking ahead, looking at as many aspects as you can of what will be impacted to have an overall vision. Unfortunately, it's kind of what you're saying there. That's not what we're seeing. It's as if everything was just ad hoc, where it's going to look best, where they're going to get the most accolades. So what are the consequences? And my question might get a bit more specific, but what will be the consequences of the lack of coordination between the various programs? What are the impacts of that, of working in silos and not having an overall view of what's going on? Because you could give the oil industry some grants or, tax credits or whatever, and at the same time say, well, you know what, I'm going to plant 2 billion trees, but not really see where there could be overlap between the two, or if they could work against each other. What are the consequences of not having an overview of all the programs? Well, that's a broad question. We say you can't see the forest for the trees. I don't know if you have an equivalent French expression. That's why in 2021 we published this report on climate change to have an overall view of the problems with not reaching greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. Our first view is that we need better leadership and coordination. I agree with your comments. We need to look at all of the measures. There are over 100 of them just on climate change, and then there are others on biodiversity and so on. So we need to see how those measures interact with the economic and social aspects, as I stated earlier, in terms of sustainable development. Yes, I agree with that. The silos within the department and departments are a barrier to having an overall vision. Okay, thank you. Very quickly, your audit.
Need my seconds.
Okay.
Merci beaucoup. Votre
Thank you very much. Your audit also stated that there was the contributions and grants process. There were 407 hours. That's what it took to fill out an application. I mean, that's so much work. I mean, you can't pay somebody 10 weeks of work just to fill out this application, especially if you're a small business. Is there anything we can do on that? Well, many of the large emitters did not submit an application, so there's a problem there too.
Thanks very much, Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. DeMarco, for, I was going to say being back, but I'm not sure you've been to Ogo for a while. At least I haven't seen you here since my time.
This is my first appearance at
It's
Ogo,
your first appearance. There you go. But of course, I think we've all had the pleasure of hearing your reports at other committees. And this issue of grants and contributions is an interesting one. I'm trying to think of questions that relate specifically to your area of responsibility, but you have a broad view of the government's emission reduction plans, and you've reported on it in the past. And it seems to me, unless I'm missing something, they kind of fall into two buckets. There's the regulatory piece, so the rules and regulations and laws that constrain different sectors from emitting. And then there's the carrots piece, which is, the grants and contributions the government's giving out as incentives to reduce emissions. And I'm wondering if it's too much to ask for you to broadly comment on these sticks and carrots buckets and which of them is proving most effective or making the biggest contribution to emissions reductions over the years that you've been in your role.
Yeah, so in Exhibit 4.1 of the Net Zero Accelerator report from last year, we try to simplify that as well. We were only able to simplify it into 4 categories. You've managed to put it into 2, but we have carbon pricing regulations, financial support, including grants and contributions, which we're talking about today, and other such as education and government procurement, such as the Green and Government Strategy. So we've used that taxonomy, but there's sort of at one trophic level higher. You could call them just carrots and sticks if you'd like. That there's nothing wrong with that. We haven't audited the contributions of each one of those buckets to say for sure how much is expected to result in the 36% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that Environment and Climate Change Canada is currently on track for according to its own calculations. But in other committee hearings, some of you have been present for, the government itself has said they expect to get about a third, I believe, from carbon pricing. The other big chunk is regulations. And then financial support and other, such as procurement, would be the remainder. But certainly carbon pricing and regulations are the 2 big ticket items.
Right. Okay. It seems to me that one of the risks involved with grants and contributions is the sort of shoehorning effect, whereby the government allocates an envelope of money for certain kinds of contributions, and then all of these instances pop up where they have potential recipients that they want to get money to somehow, and they go looking around for, envelopes of money that could be applied in that way. And because, for example, the Net Zero Accelerator Fund has a number of different criteria, not just emissions reductions, is there a risk of government using these kinds of funds as a bit of a catch-all for projects that don't necessarily emphasize emissions reductions, but might hit on some of the other criteria, so that the net effect at the end of the day is that, projects get funded, but the primary objective of reducing emissions actually gets de-emphasized in the outcomes you're seeing?
That is definitely a risk. In this instance, where most of the fund has actually been committed to already in terms of the $8 billion, yet in terms of bankable reductions, it's nowhere near the 19 to 20 megatons that Environment Canada was hoping to see out of this program by ICED. So whether the relatively modest amount of reductions, which I believe in this case was from 5 of the 17 projects. Whether that's from shoehorning or for other causes, I can't say for sure. But the main message is this is a large sum of money without a lot of bankable emissions reductions associated with it. And in terms of value for money, there is a lack of demonstration by the department that this fund is going to truly accelerate towards net zero, which is the name of the fund, in a significant way. That's the main problem with this fund.
I didn't do the calculation, but it would be interesting to know the cost per ton of those emissions, those modest emissions from the Net Zero Accelerator Fund. Maybe I can do the math between rounds.
No, we've done the math.
Okay.
It's in the report. Yeah, it's in the report.
Yeah. Page 45.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. We'll now go back to final round. Mr. Mazur for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, the government launched an $8 billion taxpayer fund program called the Net Zero Accelerator. The government claimed that they could reduce emissions by giving away $8 billion to mega corporations through this program. According to your report, the Net Zero Accelerator projects, and I quote, and I got to double check this because I can't believe what I'm actually going to say here. These funds can be fast-tracked with a letter to the Prime Minister. Down at bottom of page 8 of your report. And like I say, I hesitated because I wanted to make sure I had that quote correct. I find this quite alarming, scandalous, to say the least. Does this not concern you when you reported this and when you saw this? Does it not concern you that the world's largest companies can get access to the can write a letter to the Prime Minister and say, "Here, we need some funding to we might reduce some emissions"?
So I'll start by saying that exhibit 4.2, if I recall correctly, yes, 4.2, describes the process that is available. I do not believe that we found in any of the 17 files a letter such as that. So this describes the process that can be followed, but I don't recall there being any where there was a letter to fast track. So that's an option that's available, but you'd have to confirm for sure from the department whether they've actually used that. I don't recall having seen it being used.
So why was it there?
But pardon me?
Why was it there then? If you don't recall, like I guess that's just the standards. Like
this is just describing the approval process, and that is one of the steps that's available in the approval process. It doesn't mean that in each of the 17 they went through all of these steps.
Have you ever seen anything like that?
Well, ultimately it's ministerial accountability to the decisions being made under this, and so we can do an audit. But ultimately, the accountability is with the minister in terms of demonstrating the value to taxpayers of these funds. We do have concerns, not so much about that letter because we didn't see it being used, but we did find examples. I think it was 3 of the 17 where they were fast-tracked without due diligence, and we do have a recommendation about that. To ensure that ISED's reporting of greenhouse gas reduction commitments is accurate, the department should follow due diligence and complete the assessment for all projects before agreements are signed. So that would be our view in terms of putting into place a better due diligence process before these big ticket agreements are signed.
Why the Prime Minister? Why would you send a special letter to the Prime Minister versus someone else, like a department head, to like regular process? Like this is pretty extraordinary. $8 billion access fund, direct pipeline to the Prime Minister. Like why the Prime Minister? Was that ever explained to you in your audit, or did anybody ever ask that question?
Well, we're auditing their execution of the program, and we have concerns about that in terms of the value for money and the total amount of greenhouse gas emission reductions. It's up to government to decide the process, and they approve that. So I think that question would be better addressed to the Deputy Minister at ISED if he's to appear.
Deputy Minister of ISED. So that's who would issue this letter? Because this is an environment program, so would it not be the Deputy Minister of Environment that would issue? Who would write that letter to the Prime Minister?
Well, we haven't seen an example of such a letter, but my understanding is that, maybe I should explain this a little bit better. So the Net Zero Accelerator Fund is part of Environment and Climate Change Canada's emission reduction plan, but it's administered by ISED. So it's an ISED grant and contribution program.
They can still access billions of dollars through a letter to the Prime Minister, though, correct? These mega corporations.
Well, that's what's set out in the process that they provided to us in Exhibit 4.2, but we didn't see any examples of that letter being sent.
Wow. I guess so. I guess you don't think it's really appropriate the mega corporations can get free taxpayers' money through the Net Zero Accelerator Fund through the Prime Minister? Do you think there's a better process?
Well, our views on this are wrapped up in recommendation 4.63, that whatever process and approval agents they want to have in their flow chart, that due diligence should happen before the approval of these agreements. That's our view. It's up to government to decide who does what in terms of the approval chain, but we would like to see due diligence prior to the commitments.
Well, now go to Mr. Baines, please. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our Office of the Auditor General joining us here today. Your recent audit of the Net Zero Accelerator Initiative found that the initiative, quote, was not part of any coherent and comprehensive horizontal industry policy on decarbonization, end quote. Similarly, Environment and Climate Change Canada's internal audit of its grants and contributions programs found them to be uncoordinated. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that, on the significance of these findings?
Yes, so picking up on a theme that we touched on with the questions from Madame Vignola, looking at things in an integrated way. So let's start at the highest level. The three pillars of sustainable development, looking at environment, economy, and the social dimensions all together. That will lead to more effective decisions than looking at them in silos. And then looking across the federal government, it's been set up for, obviously, for decades and centuries in departmental silos, but the world is facing a number of challenges that now do not fit very well within each of those silos. And so government has tried to adapt by putting in some horizontal initiatives to overcome the vertical silos, but they're far from doing that in an effective way. We're still seeing siloed decision making, and the proof is in the outcomes. We've now had 30 years since Canada's commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to stabilize then reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and during that time emissions have gone up. So obviously if we keep doing the same thing and expect different results, that would be unwise. So we do need to have a better system for tackling these horizontal issues that are whole of society, not just whole of government. And one way to do that would be to rethink the departmental silos that have ruled the day so far. And as we mentioned in our climate change lessons learned report, there may be a need for a more centralized approach, a more coordinated approach.
Is that the only measure that can be taken as a recommendation? Like, what specifically can be done? Just centralizing, and then how would that work?
We've surfaced the issue. Obviously, it's a policy decision of government to decide how to address the problem that we've uncovered. We've pointed to examples in other countries where there is a more centralized approach to climate change mitigation. Does that mean it will work for sure? No, you could have a central agency that also fails to produce results. But we do know that the lack of accountability and the lack of coordination in Canada has been present now for 30 years, and we are the worst performing of the G7 countries in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So something does have to change, but it will be up to the government to recognize that problem and make the policy decisions necessary to rectify it.
There was some mention of chief executive that audit every different, maybe the silos that you're talking about. And would it be important to ensure that they coordinate to, in some capacity, and report some type of establish some type of a mechanism to centralize this? Like, do you establish sort of like a task team to do this, to put?
So you're referring to chief audit executives at each department? Yeah, so there are chief audit executives responsible within their departmental silos. Would they be the ones able to cut across these silos and effectively implement horizontality? It would be a challenge at that level, I think, to do so. I think it's going to be something that will have to come from the center of government, Treasury Board, or finance, or one of the central agencies to put into effect something like that. I don't know if each individual chief audit executive could be expected to be able to overcome those silos, given that their scope of their work is defined by their department.
How much? 20 seconds. Thank you, Mr. DeMarco.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. 2.5, Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here with us and for answering our questions. I have many other questions, but I do have a debate I need to finish here. Members, I'd like to come back to the debate regarding the report to the House regarding the Governor General's expenditures in terms of French courses. And I'm going to reread it because some of you were not there. Given that the media reported in September 2024 that the Governor General of Canada, Mary Simon, was still unable to hold discussions in French during a visit to a community organization in Lévis in Quebec, and that she had to, for the same reasons, cancel some events, and that she had committed in 2021 when she was appointed that she would learn French, and that she stated again on Radio-Canada that she wanted to be able to speak to Francophones in their mother tongue by the end of 2024, and that she also cannot speak to others of who are Francophone across the country. We express our...
Are you looking to remove your motion that was adjourned?
Le débat était ajourné. Il n'y a pas eu de
Because
vote sur
we
la
have to
motion.
The debate was adjourned, but there wasn't a vote on the motion, and I want the debate on this motion to go forward.
Perfect. Then we will get to a dilatory vote on it, but you can't speak to it. You have to move to reintroduce it,
OK.
and then it causes a dilatory vote on it, whether we will resume the debate. So you can't speak on it first, and then...
Je ne peux pas parler.
So I can't speak.
Put it back on the table first before we'll actually continue the debate. So we can consider that you're moving it to have the vote whether we will resume the debate on it. But we have to have the vote first
Si c'est la
before you can
procédure,
continue
si
the debate.
c'est la procédure.
If that's the procedure, well, let's follow it, yes? We have few choices, it would seem.
I'll have the clerk will do a vote dilatory motion to resume the debate on Mrs. Vignola's adjourned debate on her motion. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Miao?
No.
Mr. Baines?
No.
Mr. Johari?
No.
Mr. Kuzmichek?
Nope.
Mr. Souza?
No.
Ms. Block?
No.
Mr. Major?
No.
Ms. Kuzi?
Against.
Madame Vignola?
Je veux que le débat reprenne. Oui.
And Mr. Backrack? Okay, so yeas pour 2, and nays contre 8, 8.
So it is defeated. We will not be resuming that debate right now. I will now turn over to Mr. Backrack for your final 2.5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. DeMarco, the leader of the Conservative Party has said if his party were to form government, he would not pull Canada out of the Paris Agreement, which comes with certain emissions reduction commitments that have already been made and can't be watered down, as I understand it. But we know very little about his actual climate plans. There are many policies that he has opposed, but few that he's supported. The main one that we hear about repeatedly is this idea of meeting our emissions reduction target by exporting fossil fuels to other parts of the world. Could you comment on the efficacy of that approach, whether it's consistent with the Paris Agreement, and whether other countries are meeting their emissions reductions targets using that approach?
So the choice of measures is a decision to be made by government and Parliament itself, to the extent that any of those measures are reflected in legislation. What I have said before in previous committee hearings with other committees is that if any of the big ticket items from the current suite of measures, and we have in our Net Zero Act report a list of 80 measures that are ongoing, and then another 37 that are proposed, if we remove any big ticket item, another replacement measure needs to be put in place to compensate for that so that it still adds up. Having said all of that, even if you look at all of the measures now, they still don't add up to 40 to 45%. So we're actually, if we're to meet the Paris Agreement target that Canada set for itself in its NDC, a 40 to 45% reduction from 2005 levels by 2030, we're actually still in need of more measures or ramped up, ratcheted up existing measures. So we're not even at the point where we're meeting the target or on track to meet the target. So I'm hesitant to say, have a view on a specific measure and how one can be replaced. We're looking at the global 40 to 45%, and we don't even have an emissions reduction plan yet that has bankable measures that will get to 40%, the lowest part of that range of 40 to 45. So we still have work to be done. What government chooses to do in terms of the measures is up to government.
And are you seeing any other countries employing the policy approach that he suggested?
I don't think I've done a deep dive into that particular issue in any of the audits so far.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mrs. Block, please.
Let's take a look at Norway.
Mrs. Block, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to follow up on a line of questioning by my colleague, Mr. Masier. I want to go back and ask who would have written the programming rules stating that one could fast track approvals to the Prime Minister? Who would be responsible for that rule?
So you're looking at Exhibit 4.2 again in terms of the process?
Yes.
So that process is managed by ISED, and the witnesses earlier today would have been involved in approving the creation of this fund at Treasury Board. Who actually made the decision for that off-ramp where the things can be fast-tracked? I don't know, I'll guess, Monsieur Blouin, if we were given that information as to who approved the process set out in Exhibit 4.2?
We were not given that information.
So I'm not looking for a name, perhaps even a position. Who would have the authority to write that sort of a rule in place in a process?
So I would say that the process generally was managed by ISED. It would have required some level of Treasury Board approval. At least the program itself would have required some level of Treasury Board approval. But I would suggest that you speak to the Deputy Minister at ISED to find out specifically what position was involved in approving that aspect of the flowchart. I do not have a certain answer for you, unfortunately.
And I'm not sure if you answered this earlier. Is this a standard rule for departments to have in place when seeking approvals for certain grants and contributions?
Again, that's probably a question better directed to the deputy ministers and at a global level, the Comptroller General, who was here earlier. I haven't seen that particular example of fast tracking with a letter to the Prime Minister in other grants and contributions audits that we've done recently, but we've only looked at a few, and there are dozens and dozens of these programs. So it's better to ask someone who has more of a global view of this process, and I would say that would be Treasury Board.
Okay, thank you. In many audits your office has completed over the last few years, one of the primary issues that has been highlighted in those reports has been the lack of documentation and perhaps even mismanagement. When you see continued mismanagement called out over several years with no improvements, would you agree that a full forensic audit would help to give a full picture of the mismanagement?
One could scope an audit to look at it in a global sense, or one can look for the trends across our audits. I would say that both the audits I've spoken about earlier today, as well as some of other ones to come to mind, we have looked at the issue of open and transparent process and documentation, as you just talked about. We've had concerns about eligibility. We've had concerns about whether the expected outcomes are being achieved, for example, in the Net Zero Accelerator. And we've had concerns about whether grant and contribution programs are properly being measured, monitored, and verified. I can speak to those at a general level by connecting the dots amongst many reports. Whether we would need to do another report to do that, I'm not sure. But
Okay.
those are themes that have come up across several reports.
So a fuller audit could be in order. Yes.
Well, an audit of that level would need to be approved by the Auditor General in
Right.
terms of looking at such a large. So it would be up to her to decide, looking at the opportunity costs against other audits. But
Thank
I
you.
can tell you that these themes have already come up in several audits, and we can connect the dots at least for those.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm going to turn over the last few seconds of
Thank
my
you, Ms. Block.
time to Ms.
So,
Kusi.
given the larger context of today, Chair, we have the 2019 Treasury Board guidelines, which clearly have not been adhered to. We saw the bad audit out of Global Affairs Canada. We now have a part-time minister, and I believe, Mr. Chair, that this necessitates greater oversight has been brought to the attention of the committee by my colleague. As such, I'm putting on verbal notice the following motion. Given that grants and contributions by Environment and Climate Change Canada has increased by $625 million since 2016, only 5.5% of all grants and contributions from ECCC were reviewed in a departmental audit. The audit stated that there was potential for abuse and mismanagement that may lead to reputational and legal damage, that this review was only an internal review and not independent, that the committee call on the Auditor General to complete a value for money and performance audit on the Grants and Contributions Program at Environment and Climate Change Canada and report the findings to the House. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Mr. Sousa to finish off 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. So Canada uses 2005 as its baseline, right, in terms of the emissions reductions commitments. How much has been reduced since 2005?
Based on the latest official figures from Environment and Climate Change Canada, which are the 2022 emissions, it would be between 7 and 8% from 2005 levels to 2022, and the target is 40 to 45%.
So in absence of those measures, how much higher would emissions be by 2030? Some of this is estimates, right?
So Environment Canada does a projection, and people may call it a business as usual or an extrapolation as to what would have happened in this alternate world where none of these measures were in place. But there are so many assumptions in that sort of modeling that I can't tell you a number that I'm comfortable with as to what the emissions would be today without any measures. They would obviously be significantly higher than today, but I'm not going to put a number on it.
So the Canadian Institute, I believe, of Environment, they estimate it would be about 41% higher. Is that correct?
You would have to ask them.
Is that what you've read on their part?
I don't recall reading that specific number, but if that's their number, that's it. But it would have assumptions
So
associated.
I guess my point is we recognize, and I agree that we need a sustainable effort by which to go forward. I want to look at the environmental benefit, but I also want to look at the economic benefit, the green economy, and other things that we're trying to put in force to enable us to improve economic circumstances as well as the environmental circumstances, as well as the social benefit. There is a benefit by which all of this comes to be. And we can, look backwards and go back to days of coal plants in Ontario. For example, when we decarbonized our system, we got part of the Cap and Trade Initiative. We became part of the Western Climate Initiative alongside Quebec. And we were taking advantage of a great benefit that was taken to reduce emissions and reduce climate impacts on society and on local communities. That's what Canada's trying to do in part of the overall Paris Agreement. That is the efforts that we're trying to proceed. So measures are being taken, measures are being enacted. I guess my point is, and there are things that we can do to improve upon them. That's why we have our internal audits. That's why we take these efforts. That's why we take these efforts. That's why we rely on people like you, experts in this area, to guide and to provide some direction as to how to proceed in a better way. The question is it not appropriate then to take measures and audits and reviews to sustain and support the program? Others believe there should be no program. Others are assuming that there is no climate change. Others are saying that, hey, you know what, let's just go back to glory days of coal plants and emissions and manufacturing without looking at alternatives going forward. Can you give us, Mr. DeMarco, your impressions as to what we should do going forward? And is it not appropriate then to do what we're doing?
So let me answer that at a high level. There are measures, especially the regulatory ones and carbon pricing, that have the ability to achieve significant reductions. We don't even have enough measures now to add up to our target of 40 to 45%. As I answered a question earlier, we're in a position where we need more measures to do so. The fact that we have some measures that are providing added value, does that mean we can rest on those laurels? No, we are far from achieving our target, and on a comparative basis, we're the worst amongst the G7. So one cannot just say, oh, we're doing something that's good enough because it's better than nothing. Compared against our neighbors and compared against our own target, we're not doing enough.
But we're attempting to do more. That's the point. That's the whole crux of the matter, right? We have taken these initiatives. We realize that we can do better. We're taking those matters in control. But I do want to highlight some allegations that are being proposed. Do you see the Prime Minister making these decisions unilaterally with submissions being put before him? Like, is there any interference by government officials or elected officials to obstruct the reduction of emissions? Is it not the policy to try to foster greater reductions overall?
So the stated intent by a range of governments over the past 30 years has been to achieve an emission reduction target. We failed on all of them. Does that mean that that the measures aren't working individually? Some of them are working well and some of them aren't, but they're not adding up to enough. That's my main point. So if we look at the last few years of emissions, they're hovering around the same thing. Since COVID, they're hovering around the same amount. That means that over 30% of the 40% to 45% target for 2030, there are now only 6 years left to get all of those 30-something percent in reductions. So the point I'm trying to make is, to date, the results achieved from all these measures have not added up to enough. More effective and probably more measures will be needed to achieve the goal of 40 to 45% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. We need to redouble our efforts to fight climate change.
Has the government initiated a receptivity to do so?
That is past our time. Sorry.
It was a yes or no answer.
We're quite a bit past our time, but Mr. DeMarco, Mr. Blunt, thanks for being with us. You've shown why you are one of my favorite witnesses on the other side in public accounts, so thank you very much. I appreciate it. Very quickly, colleagues, we've got a couple budgets to approve. You received copies of them the other day. I see thumbs up all around. There's two budgets, one for grants and contributions, one for Canada Post. Thank you very much. This Friday at noon, please have witnesses for the Indigenous procurement. I haven't received anything since the motion was passed, so Friday at noon, please. And then Canada Post, we're doing that Thursday. We've received 20 recommendations. Our wonderful analysts have paired a bunch together. Could I ask you to please take a look at the recommendations put forward by the analysts of bunching them together and be prepared, hopefully after chatting with among yourselves on how we can reduce those so we can get through the report on Thursday. And with that, I appreciate everyone's patience. We are adjourned. Sorry, I couldn't hear you.